This video will show you how to use Microsoft Excel and specifically the pivot tables function within Microsoft Excel to create a joint frequency distribution table and some joint relative frequency distribution tables to then answer some questions about data. So for this lab, the first part, the empirical probability section, is looking at a data set that is a subset from some data collected by Randstad Holding Incorporated, and they examined the preferred communication methods for four different generations, specifically the preferred communications in the workplace. So there's a neat article in USA Today that talks about some of the differences among the generations in the workplace. If you want to read it, their link to it's right there. So the first thing I'm going to show you how to do is to create a joint frequency distribution in Microsoft Excel using the pivot tables function, and then we'll create a joint relative frequency distribution. So for looking at two different variables that intersect or that are co-occurring. And then I'll show you how to do the joint relative frequency distribution table for conditional probabilities, or the probability of a certain communication method when they're from a specific generation. And I'll show you how to answer some questions based on those different tables that we're going to create. So let's go ahead and go into our data. So you will have access to this data set. It's called the Communication by Generation data set. It's referenced right here in your lab. You'll get it in your Modules tab in Canvas. So before we create pivot tables, I just want to walk you through how to understand the data in its raw form. So this first column represents all the different generations of all the people in our sample. The second column, column B, represents their preferred method of communication. Each row is one person, so this first person is from Generation Y. They preferred email communication. We can also see that we have, 316 people in our data set. It goes down to 317, but we have to account for the fact that the first row is the column labels. So let's go ahead and create some pivot tables. As long as you're clicked in somewhere in your data, and you go to the Insert tab and then click Pivot Tables, Excel is going to know that you want to create a pivot table for all this data. And I can just double check it to make sure that the little dancing line is highlighting all of my data, and it is. Make sure that it's all in there, and then that New Worksheet is selected. So I'm going to click OK. And let's go ahead and right-click here, select Rename, and let's label this Pivot Table, to keep everything organized. So let's tell Microsoft Excel that we want generation to be where our column labels are based on, and communication to be what our row labels are based on, and we want to count the values for communication. So we'll click and drag that down to values. Okay, so this table that we just created gives us the frequencies, not the relative frequencies or the proportions, just the raw number of the frequencies. So looking at this table, we can see that 13 people were baby boomers who preferred email. 99 people were baby boomers. And 45 people preferred email. And you can interpret all the different cells based on that general pattern. So that's for the first question in your lab, the first output that's being requested. So let's go ahead and copy. So highlight all of this, hit Control-C. You see the dancing line tells you, hey, we copied it, and then paste it into your lab. So just click here and then hit Control-V. All right. Now part 2 is asking you for the joint relative frequency distribution. So to determine the co-occurrence of different events. So if we go here, let's go ahead and paste this down here. So I've already copied it. If I just click on a cell and then hit Control-V, I'll paste it there. And let's go ahead and label this joint relative frequency distribution. So I highlighted this, hit Control-C, go here, hit Control-V. And let's just go ahead and paste this here and delete the word relative. So we're labeling our different tables so we can keep track of them. So right now this is still in terms of frequencies, but we want Excel to convert this into relative frequencies based on the grand total. So an easy way to do that is to just highlight all of our numbers and then right-click, Show Values As, % of grand total. Bam. How cool is that? So now we have all of our joint relative frequencies. And I can double check this, so I'll bring my calculator up. So we know that this is supposed to tell us the percentage of all of our sample, so all 316 people in our sample, who are baby boomers and preferred email communication. So I can check this by saying, okay, 13 people out of our sample were baby boomers who preferred email communication out of 316 total. So that's our probability in decimal form. And if I multiply this by 100, I'll get the percentage. And hey, they match up. Just wanted to show you where those numbers come from. So that's the joint relative frequency distribution. So here, now we can say 4.11% of this sample were baby boomers who preferred email communication. 14.24% preferred email communication. And 31.33% were baby boomers, for example. So let's go ahead and copy this and paste it into question number 2 for our lab. So I highlight it all, hit Control-C, go here, put a little space, hit Control-V. Be sure to answer all these questions based on this table. So now let's move on to number 3, the joint relative to group total frequency distribution. So I'm just going to copy this, hit Control-C to copy it, and put this here just to keep track of everything. So let's go ahead and copy, so highlight all that, copy the original frequency distribution, and then paste it here. And now we want to tell Microsoft Excel that we don't want these to be in reference to the grand total, but we want them to be in reference to the column totals. Because what we're looking for are the probabilities of each preferred communication method when people are from a specific generation. So these are all the marginal frequencies for each generation. So in other words, the column totals. And for instance, we want to know the probability, or actually the percentage, of our sample who, for instance, are preferring email communication when they are baby boomers. So it'll be based on these frequencies here. So let's go ahead and highlight all of our numbers in our data set, all of our frequencies, and then right-click, go to Show Value As, % of column total. Now we could do % of row total if we were basing our conditions on the preferred method of communication. So if we wanted to know what was the percentage of people who were baby boomers when they preferred email communication. But for our purposes, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because, I mean, what comes first? Your generation comes first, and then your preferred method of communication comes second. Just wanted to show you that, though, if you wanted to do that. All right, so now we're looking at this, and we can see, for instance, that 13.13% of our sample of baby boomers preferred email communication. 14.24% of our sample are still preferring email communication. You'll see that these are still the same because we're basing these on the column totals. But now, if we're basing these on the column totals, now this is 100%. So I'll show you how that comes to be. So if we look at our calculator, let's first figure this out. So what percent of baby boomers, all these guys, preferred email communication? Well, 13 of the boomers preferred email communication. So 13. How many boomers did we have? 99. And that gives us this. We multiply by 100 to get the %. So that's where that comes from. Now the reason that this is 100 is because if you think about it, all right, 99 boomers out of 99, well, that gives you 1. Multiply that by 100 to get the %, and you've got 100%. So that's the math behind where those numbers come from. but the pivot tables makes this so much easier than calculating each one of these individual probabilities or percentages. So now you have all these different tables that you can use to answer all the questions. So let's go ahead and copy this one, paste it into part 3 here, Control V. And now you can answer these questions. And then in number 4, you can think about the differences between these two tables to answer this question here.